All right, this is part two of our ongoing discussion of propaganda and the environment. Last time we were taking a look at the propaganda associated with creating a consumer republic, which is focusing on trying to get us to buy as much materials as possible and to cycle through them as quickly as possible so that we'll have to buy more products. And that was created in the aftermath of the Great Depression, World War II, in order to increase spending and production and to jumpstart the economy so that we didn't lapse back into the Great Depression. But the idea that I wanted you to start thinking about with the complexity of this, of the propaganda that's associated with that, are what are the unintended consequences of this type of environment that we are creating, whether this environment is sustainable. Yes, it did have some benefits in creating a very robust and vibrant economy. But as we look today with the increasing population and our way of life, that we are utilizing these resources at an exponential rate, that is it really creating an environment that we want to live in? As we think about basing our identity and our self-esteem on what we buy, what we can consume, are we happier as a result? Is this really the environment that we want? And the main drive of course, industry is so that we don't see these unintended consequences, so they can keep this from us, so that we will continue to go happily about our day, just consuming to keep the mechanism of the economy going. And then the question becomes, well, what do we do as a result of this? And sometimes dealing with environmental issues, it can be so overwhelming that that we resort to this feeling of helplessness. And in some ways, as I've had many discussions with people, it's easy to go from this climate change denial, or it's not really a problem, to then creating awareness, and then immediately it goes to powerlessness and then apathy, feeling as though there's nothing that we can do, that the problem is too big. And the problem is big, and it's due to several decades that have built up and keeping us oblivious to what's happening. And it is complex, and the solution is not going to be easy, but that's not to say that we should just give up and do nothing, right? As we think about that, the scenario on the boat, right? The idea is that we're presented with a moral choice here. It's going to be a difficult moral choice moving forward, but we can't just say, I'm not going to make any decisions. I'm not going to change my behavior, or I'm not going to, I'm just going to keep going in the direction that I'm going without, right, thinking about the consequences. It's one thing if you're choosing to continue to live in this way, but we should at least be empowered to know what are the consequences of some of the behaviors that we're at. And so this is getting us to see some of those intended consequences, so we can be empowered to really think about our actions and think about acting for ourselves. I want to take a look at another component that's related to environmental issues and the propaganda of the food industry. And even though this just doesn't necessarily feel related to climate change and the ever-growing problem of pollution, there are some elements here that do overlap that I'll kind of circle back to. But as we think about the food industry, as we go to the grocery store and buy foods, the propaganda is that all of our food is coming from, these green fields and these farms that have, the red barn and the blue sky, and giving us a sense of that all our food is, quote, natural or fresh, or, and they don't necessarily tell us the full story. And a lot of the food industry is trying to pull a curtain between the production of our food and what's happening, behind the scenes, and what's happening right before it gets to our plate. And so there is some propaganda that goes in within that. I want to
Tyson, for
talk about
example, is
Tyson Foods and the issues of raising chickens and the poultry industry. And it's not necessarily to pick on the poultry industry specifically, this is just a microcosm of a larger problem that we see happening within the world. And so think of this as just one small component to an overall, larger issue. Some of you watched, had you watch Food Inc. You had a choice between watching Food Inc. or the birds. Some of you chose to watch Food Inc., and so this clip is going to come from that, so this will be familiar to you. Those that didn't watch it, this might be a little bit new, so just we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the ideas here.
Tyson, for example, is the biggest meatpacking company in the history of the world. The industry changed the entire way that chicken are raised. Birds are now raised and slaughtered in half the time they were 50 years ago, but now they're twice as big. People like to eat white meat, so they redesigned the chicken to have large breasts. They not only changed the chicken, they changed the farmer. Today, chicken farmers no longer control their birds. A company like Tyson owns the birds from the day they're dropped off until the day that they're slaughtered.
That part that you just saw there, it looks really horrific. It's mainly them getting some type of sterilization, not a sterilization, but a shot for them to, I don't know, have some type of antibiotics. I don't think it's antibiotics, but something along those lines. And this is them going to a...
I understand why farmers don't want to talk, because the company can do what it wants to do as far as pay goes, since they control everything. But it's just gotten to the point that it's not right what's going on, and I've just made up my mind. I'm going to say what I have to say. I understand why others don't want to do it. And I'm just to the point that it doesn't matter anymore. Something has to be said. It is nasty in here. There's dust flying everywhere. There's feces everywhere.
Just to pause it for a second here to give you the context, most large chicken companies will require chicken farmers to not have windows in their chicken coop. They don't want, that access, right? So again, the question is, why is it that they don't want there to be windows? And of course, they probably have their own explanation for this, but it seems as though they're trying to have some type of secrecy or some concealment about what's going on inside. And so this farmer here is kind of fed up with the major chicken corporation, the chicken industry, and so she wants people to be able to see what happens on the inside, so that again, that we can make an informed decision. It's not necessarily to suggest that that we have to radically change. If you don't want to change, right, that's up to you. But at least the question is, should we know about it so that we can have a discussion on what's happening on the inside? So she's going to give us that window into the inside of the chicken coop.
This isn't farming. This is just mass production, like an assembly line in a factory. When they grow from a chick, and in 7 weeks you've got a 5.5 pound chicken, their bones and their internal organs can't keep up with the rapid growth. A lot of these chickens here, they can take a few steps and then they plop down. It's because they can't keep up with all the weight that they're carrying.
A lot of the chickens, because of the the rapid growth of them, they have heart failure. Their hearts can't keep up with their bodies growing too fast.
That's normal. There's antibiotics that's put into the feed, and of course that passes through the chicken. the bacteria builds up a resistance, so antibiotics aren't working anymore. I have become allergic to all antibiotics and can't take them. When it's dark inside the houses, the chickens lay down. It's less resistance when they're being caught. Traditionally, it's been African American men. Now we're seeing more and more Latino catchers, undocumented workers, and from their point of view, they don't have any rights and they're just not going to complain. You know, the companies like these kind of workers. It doesn't matter if the chickens get sick, all of the chickens still go to the plant for processing.
So the idea that we see here is that our food, by and large, in the industry, comes from factories, right? But the messaging that we see within within the markets that we go to is a very different messaging, and the idea of Tyson and Purdue not wanting people to, cameras inside the chicken coop tends to lead to some problematic ideas of why don't they want us to know, right? Why can't we have an actual discussion about what's happening? Why are they trying to keep this a secret from us? And we don't really know the exact answer to that because they won't really respond to that, but it does lead to greater questions of, why so much emphasis on secrecy, right? Why so much focus on propaganda where they're telling one message, but then the reality is very different from that. So the main idea that I would like you to get from this is to be informed, to be empowered within consuming as we move forward, rather than continually believing the propaganda, the false propaganda that's out there. Another element that's related to the environment is the amount of toxicity, the amount of chemicals that are being used today. Rachel Carson, which I had you read from the Silent Spring, she observes the loss of birds. She worked at Michigan State's campus, and one spring morning she noticed that there were no birds singing, and so she started to wonder why that was, and she investigated, and what she found was that they were spraying the trees with pesticides to keep bugs out. But the problem with that, the unintended consequence, was that the birds were eating the bugs, and so the birds then were being poisoned by the pesticide, which was DDT. And so she does this investigation about the cause of the effects of DDT on birds, and then she made a larger connection. Well, if this is happening to smaller species, could this also have some unintended consequences for human beings? And the more she investigated, the more she found that there were these harsh effects. Over on the right-hand side, this is just a magazine article that talks about DDT, and it sounds a little bit strange today as we think about what we know about DDT. But back then, the whole idea of the DDT was to protect you from insects, from disease-carrying insects. And so this advertisement is an advertisement for DDT-laced wallpaper. So the idea is that you can line your children's room with this wallpaper to keep bugs out. The other side of this is that your child is then going to have, the exposure to DDT. And some of the unintended consequences that they found with DDT is infertility, birth defects, cancer, asthma, diabetes, and learning disabilities. And so Rachel Carson is the pioneer for the environmental movement, where she's taken a look at our environment. What are we doing to the environment? And investigating a little bit deeper to think about the consequences to some of the scientific advancements, to some of the chemical uses that we're using in the environment. And so she starts to, she launches this movement that says, okay, we need to have a deeper respect for the environment and a deeper knowledge of what we're doing to it. Just to briefly talk a little bit about Steingraber's Living Downstream. She does a documentary in 2010. I just want to talk about some of the ideas from this documentary, which builds upon the ideas of Carlson. And what she's doing, what Steingraber is doing, is examining the elements that are from factories that they put near waterways, such as a river, and then they carry these things down the stream. And she's concerned particularly about one pesticide that's used in agriculture, atrazine, that they use to keep pests out. And what atrazine does is it protects the seed from bugs coming in and eating it. It'll kill the bugs so that the crop can grow. But what she argues is that when the rain comes in, it washes right and gets into the soil, and through the soil it gets down into the groundwater, and then it just carries that to 50, 60 miles away, even. And then it gets into our groundwater, and as it's getting into our groundwater, it starts to have effects on us. And so she's examining how chemicals that we're using in the environment can have these unintended consequences. And one particular scene within the film is a study that's done at Stanford, and they're going into Salinas Valley, where most of our vegetables are grown. That's in California, where a lot of our carrots and green beans and most of our vegetables come from. And so there's a lot of agriculture there, and there's a lot of pesticides there. And what the researcher does, it goes into the water that's out there, the rivers, and starts to collect frogs. And so as he's collecting frogs, he's observing how the atrazine is affecting the frogs. And frogs are a simpler cell organism, and so they're more susceptible to chemicals in the environment. What he found is that the frogs actually start to change gender, and so you have a male frog that actually becomes a female and starts to have children, and some of those effects. And although we can say, okay, well, those are frogs, that's a different entity than humans. Humans are infinitely more complex as far as our genetic makeup is concerned. But then again, the question is, how is this affecting us? And it's a complicated issue. It's not as though it's a one for one and we can just have an easy solution. There are unknown consequences, right? So we don't necessarily know exactly how these chemicals are affecting the human body, but part of the reason is because there's about 100,000 synthetic chemicals in daily use, and so there's so many chemicals out there that are influencing us. It's hard to pinpoint which one's doing what. Another thing to consider, right, as we think about toxins in the environment, thinking about the air pollution, just to read through this study to think about the connection to what kind of environment do we want to live in, right? As we think about the food choices that we have, what kind of food choices do we want to make, what kind of environment do we want to live in. The hearts of young city dwellers contain billions of toxic air pollution particles, research has revealed. And even in the study's youngest subject, who was 3, damage could be seen in the cells of the organ's critically pumping muscles that contain the tiny particles. More than 90% of the world's population lives with toxic air, according to the World Health Organization, which has declared the issue a global health emergency. For really young people, the evidence is now that very early stage damage, both in the heart and in the brain. We have a likely candidate particle able to access both organs, with the pathological evidence to show damage is happening. A recent comprehensive review concluded that air pollution may be damaging every organ and virtually every cell in the human body as tiny particles are inhaled, moved in the bloodstream, and are transported around the body. And so the issue that we see with the environment, it is complex. We have a lot of different avenues. We have a lot of problems with climate change. We have a lot of problems with air pollution. We have a lot of problems with chemicals being used, and then within agriculture, within livestock, we're using a lot of antibiotics, and the question is, what is that doing? And so this is a complex problem, and it's going to take a multi-pronged approach in order to solve it. And what we see within the birds, just to briefly go through this, is a similar kind of idea. What Hitchcock's examining is how the environment is reacting against us as we take it for granted, as we start to do some of the modern living that we have. He's examining how animals can tend to attack, or the environment can tend to attack. And so, even though it's more of a, in some ways, it's a kind of a sillier or unrealistic type of scenario here in some ways, it does give us a kind of larger context of how is the environment responding to us. And so here you see the birds that are attacking the children, and some of the environment responding to us. Thinking about just the historical context of this U.S. and the environment, Lyndon Johnson was really the first president that put forth a national environmental policy in 1969, and mainly the reason for this was there was a river in Ohio, the Cuyahoga River, that actually caught fire, and it was strange that it happened and caught a lot of people's attention. How in the world can a river catch fire? And the reason was because it was so polluted. And so Lyndon Johnson said, well, we need to actually take action to make sure that things don't get so polluted that we're actually harming the environment. And then Richard Nixon took the next step, developing the Environmental Quality Council that mainly focused on eliminating pollution in the environment. And then you have the Advisory Committee on Environmental Quality, which is focusing on conservation, preserving specific areas so that won't be polluted, so we can actually have some areas that are unaffected by human development. And then this led to the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, which today is seen as harmful. A lot of the propaganda out there takes a look at the EPA and suggests that it's a job killer and that it's trying to kill industry. And in some ways, I can see some validity to that argument, right? The idea that if you're putting a regulation on gas emissions, or putting regulations on toxins in the environment, it does regulate business, right? But then again, we have to think about is this more of a complex picture than them just going in to kill companies? Are they trying to protect something? And the real question for that is it worth protecting? Should we be protecting it? I wanted to read through Lyndon Johnson's remarks that he gave at the University of Michigan in 1964 in connection, as we think about the future, as we think about moving beyond this class, and what are we to take from it? What are we to take from these ideas about the environment? Just to take a look at his ideas. I think he has some very thought-provoking qualities that he teases out here. He says, for a century we labored to settle and subdue a continent. For half a century we called upon unbound invention and untiring industry to create an order of plenty for all our people. The challenge for the next half century is whether or not we have the wisdom to use that wealth to enrich and elevate our national life, and to advance the quality of our American civilization. The Great Society rests on abundance and liberty for all. It demands an end to poverty and racial injustice, to which we are totally committed in our time. But that's just the beginning. Aristotle said, men come together in cities in order to live, but they remain together in order to live a good life. It is harder and harder to live a good life in American cities today. Worst of all, expansion is eroding the precious and time-honored values of community with neighbors and communion with nature. The loss of these values breeds loneliness, boredom, and indifference. And so the idea here is that we're losing that connection with the natural world as we focus more on cities and our own homes, and kind of isolating ourselves from the outside world. And he's suggesting that loss of our connection with nature is going to lead to loneliness, boredom, and indifference. And as we think about our world today, is that perhaps the reason for a lot of the loneliness and boredom and indifference that we're feeling? Our society will never be great until our cities are great. Today, the frontier of imagination and innovation is inside those cities and not beyond their borders. Green fields and dense forests are disappearing. A few years ago, we were greatly concerned about the ugly American. Today, we must act to prevent an ugly America. For once the battle is lost, once our natural splendor is destroyed, it can never be recaptured. And once man can no longer walk with beauty and wonder at nature, his spirit will wither and his sustenance be wasted. And so he said these remarks in 1964, and I wonder if they're even more relevant today as we take a look at people who feel lonely, bored, and indifferent, whether our loss, that connection with the natural world, is starting to have unintended consequences, not just on the environment, but on ourselves, right, on our own identity. Taking a look at what can we do moving forward, what are some ways to combat some of these, environmental concerns. I wanted to end with Colin Bevan's No Impact Man, and what he does is he takes a look at how to resolve some of these major environmental issues. And some of the facts that he was concerned with, he suggests that 80% of our products are used only once. This again gets back to the idea that we talked about last time, with only 1% of what we buy is in use 6 months later. The average American disposes 4.6 pounds of trash per day. That we're constantly, cycling through the what we buy. And just to give you context of this, when I was in school at the University of Michigan, we lived in married housing, and we had all of our neighbors were from all over the world, right? We had people from China, from Australia, England. They were from all over. And what was interesting about this, at the end of the day, we had all kind of had the same large dumpster, and we'd all kind of meet there as we kind of walked out at the end of the day and dispose of our trash. And here I was, as the American, coming in with 2 huge bagfuls of trash to throw away, and each one of them had one tiny little like Walmart bag full of trash that they would get rid of. And so I was always in awe by how little they actually did dispose. And so thinking about our behaviors, what are what are some ways that we can change our behaviors? And this is going to get into what Colin Bevan's talking about in No Impact Man. And so just to give you context of that 4 pounds of trash per day, that's 1,700 pounds per year per person, which is about 530 billion pounds of trash per year. And that gets back to that idea of exporting our trash to other countries. Food packaging is 20% of our waste, and 4.8 million tons of paper waste and plates, napkins, towels, and cups. And so a lot of the waste that we're using can be reduced in some ways. And so what Bevan does in his book, The No Impact Man, is he suggests, okay, there's major problems with the environment. What can we do about it? And so he says, for 1 year, we're not going to have any carbon footprint. And so, in order to do that, he develops these rules that he and his family have to live through to see if it's even possible. So that's the question, right? As we think about how overwhelming it is, he wants to see if it's even possible to not have a carbon footprint for a year. And so that means no trash, right? So the idea is that he can't have any type of plastic or any type of waste that he throws out. So he's going to do more compost. He's going to do no CO2 emissions, which means there's going to be no cars. He lives in New York City, so he and his wife have to either walk or bike to work. It also means no use of electricity for the most part. That means no elevators in New York. So think about how tall the buildings are there. So they have to use they have to use stairs every time. And then there actually becomes more of a complex problem, because I don't remember if it was either she had a family member that passed away or a family member that was getting married. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I read the book. But anyway, there was an event that she wanted to go to. And he says, we can't because planes have CO2 emissions. And so she's like, yeah, but I'm going. He's like, but I'm doing this project. And so there's this kind of big debate between them. Eventually, she decided to go. And so the whole idea of the No Impact Man was not that he has zero or, he doesn't do anything, but he has to counter whatever he does, right? So I think at the end of the book, in order to counter the amount of CO2 emissions they did going on the plane to the event, they had to plant trees or something like that to try to balance it out. So the idea is that it's like on a scale that the scales are going to balance. No toxins in the water. He also states part of the rules are no produce from places greater than 250 miles away. A lot of our produce comes from all over the world. We'll have oranges from Spain and tomatoes from Spain, right, shipped all the way to Idaho. And so, and then we have to think about the CO2, right, emissions from ships that are being shipped across the sea, and the pollution that's happening, and then the amount of CO2 from the semi trucks that's taking it from the ports to our place in Idaho. So there is a lot of CO2 with the food that's being transported. So no produce from greater than 250 miles away. Again, no elevators, no subways. That's part of CO2. No products and packaging. That's part of no trash. No plastics. No air conditioning, because air conditioning takes electricity. Electricity comes by and large from coal, which does have its own CO2 emissions, and also has its own problems with that emission. No TV, and no buying anything new. And so if they're going to buy something, it has to be repurposed. They have to go to a secondhand store or something like that. So it's not necessarily new. So that's just a way to cut down on the amount of waste. And so what I would have you do if we were in face to face is I would have you break up into small groups and think about which do you think of these, this criteria, which would be the hardest to give up, right? Would it be no trash? Would it be no CO2? Right? Which would you think would be the hardest to give up? It's kind of interesting because as they went through, it kind of chronicled the book chronicled their journey. And if you're interested in the book, I highly recommend it. It's kind of a fun read. It feels extreme, right? And it feels kind of crazy, but it's kind of an interesting experiment to see if it's possible. But the hardest thing for them to give up, for him, I think it was the CO2. For his wife, it was the no waste, because they had want to say a 1-year-old, 6-month to 1-year-old, something like that. And so the idea of no waste means no plastics, which means no diapers. And so she had to use cloth diapers, and she said that was completely miserable, having to wash those all the time. And so that was the hardest for her to give up. And so, and then another question I would have you guys talk about in groups would be, would this be easier in New York City, or would it be easier in Rexburg, right? As we think about some of these. And so the idea is that, can we do this? Do we even want to do this? Or what are some things that we can kind of take from this? And what he learned from it at the end of the book, he's not like he's living like this every day, right? He's not continuing to live like this. But he just wanted to see if it was possible. And what he did take away from it was there were some things that he could do pretty easily that they seemed hard or complicated. He didn't know how to do it at first. But once he assimilated that into his daily life, he said that it was actually quite easy. And so there's a lot of things that he did change. And so he has lessened his carbon footprint. And so the question that we can kind of think about moving forward is, are there things that we can do that can reduce the amount of impact that we're having? And thinking about, right, the last kind of component that we'll end off with today is this idea of, happiness. As we think about, we want to be happier, getting back to Fourth Nephi, where the people were living happily, right? And this state of happiness and state of equality. Here we see the happiness indicator in the United States with the GDP, right? As the GDP has gone up, as we live in this consumer republic, our GDP has gone up, our cost of our standard of living has gone up, but our level of happiness has gone down. And so even though we're, I don't know, we're in a different state right now, but the question is, are we happy, right? Thinking about this, a question that I would have you guys talk about, like the last question I would have you talk about that I'd leave you with for the day would be, what is the trend of human happiness over the last 60 to 70 years? What do you think? Why do you think this might be the case? And do you think that our way of life has anything to do with our level of happiness? And then, what can we do about it, right? How can we be happier? We generally feel as though people are more depressed today. They're more kind of lonely and miserable. And could it be that our way of life is perpetuating our own kind of sadness and feeling of loss? And so it's something to think about as we move forward. How do we, get past the propaganda that tells us this is the way we should do it? We should be part of this consumer republic. We should be part of this constant, this buying wheel of buying more stuff and then working more hours to get more money. Can we get off this, or how can we change it, or at least how can we think about it, so that we can think about being actually happier, right? That's kind of what we should be leading towards, right? So these are some of some of the major ideas, just an overview of some of the environmental concerns and some of the propaganda associated with it. So you can think about these ideas, think about the complexity to them, and then formulate your own thoughts, your own ideas as you think about moving forward and beyond the class.